Yeah.
So being in a marketing comms team at a boarding school in the UK must have been a massive challenge when COVID hit. I mean, what were those early days like when COVID came to the fore? And, and how, what did you put together a priority list as to how and who you were going to communicate with first, and how you were going to manage that sort of crisis management at the start of the pandemic?
So it was, well, for us all, it was all a bit of a shock. Make sure that we had all systems in place at home. We all had the right sort of equipment. But in the early stages, we were very much turned from marketing into a complete comms office. That's what happened within our marketing department here. But we were quite fortunate because we have our own school in China, Rongchao Centre School, and we'd actually already learned quite a bit from them, who had already gone through and were a good 4 weeks into a lockdown, remote sort of learning environment. So our first priority was obviously communicating with those parents, with our current parents, ensuring that all of our children returned safely home, had access to work, live lessons in place, and regular interaction from our teachers, but also from our boarding staff, because at the end of the day, when they are with us, we are a full boarding school. Our boarding house masters, house mistresses, they are their second parents, and they actually spend more of the year with house parents than they do their own parents. So that was really, really important, that there was a communication from those house parents with the pupils and also the parents of those children, and that sort of communication continued throughout. But it's not just the current parents we need to think about, which was obviously from a retention point of view crucial, but our prospective. If we rule out our prospective parents, a school can't operate. Obviously, we are a business at the end of the day. We had the education side sorted, but we also need to look at how do we continue the momentum that was already in place pre-COVID. But we also had to recognise the support that the staff needed. So the regular communication that staff required, not just teaching staff, support staff, such as even down to the cleaners, boarding staff, marketing, admissions, and so on. And being a level of flexibility, because we've all discussed the challenges. Andrew, you said your wife had the challenge of remote working, but we all probably sat on Zoom meetings and were trying to deliver either teaching or conference presentations. And it was important that there was a level of flexibility, and especially around where staff needed to develop themselves, continue with CPD. So like my social media officer, for example, he was fully aware that this was going to mean that video content would be more important than ever. So he self-taught himself Adobe Premiere Pro, bought a drone, and did everything that he possibly could. And so we had to also factor that in when we were looking at who we would communicate with. And finally, our community. All stakeholders, really, from a communication point of view, it was very important. But certainly our local community, very, very small town. So we realised that there was lots of families struggling there, and elderly people as well. So we set up hardship funds that they could access if they were short of food, if they needed money because they were out of work. And all of this was further information that we had to communicate through different channels, whether that was local Facebook groups around Sedbergh, whether that was on the village notice board. It was all of that had to be considered.
It's really interesting. I think there's definitely some parallels through every conversation today, listening to the different leaders and educators speaking today. I think the key focus points seem to be around clarity of communication. I think and also that empathy thing. Wayne spoke about it before, so it's really interesting that you've echoed the same there, David. And also then you touched on your social media manager. So my next question was going to be about you thinking about the prospective parents. I suspect you've obviously exploiting social media more and more now as you're communicating with those prospective parents, but did sort of the content you were creating and the messaging that you were sending to prospective parents change dramatically during that period?
So, well, we were restricted on how much content we could generate. Obviously, from having 63 Twitter accounts, which are normally active every single day, every single department, pumping out photography, video footage, is that basically dropped overnight. However, we put things in place where staff were doing sports coaching videos, were doing live lessons. Obviously, the live lessons were very, very popular. So we still maintained a big social media presence, live streaming assemblies, live streaming events, webinars, and so on. So from a communication point of view, it didn't really change. I would say we stepped it up a gear and made sure that we were reaching every audience, making sure that our communication was also translated into the many different languages because of our sort of diverse culture that we have at Sedbergh. So that was also crucial.
No, it's interesting. And do you think now in more of a digital way, when you're trying to communicate with parents, that video content piece is more and more important? Certainly, the more I talk to schools, the more emphasis they place on video content being really engaging for parents.
They do, yeah. It's something that it's very easy to engage it, even without sound, to be perfectly honest. It's actually just visually a million times better than a still flat image. But also, it's live, or it's pre-recorded, but it's actually genuine. And I think that's the thing. We worked, I would say, pre-COVID in very much of sort of video needed to be polished. It needed to be absolutely perfect, shot on high definition cameras. But I think COVID has made us realize that that's not always the case. Parents just want to actually see what the children are getting up to, and are wanting a genuine sort of representation of what the school's doing. And that comes down to prospective families as well. It's being transparent, it's being genuine about who you are.
Definitely. I think that's certainly with my Friday Club hat on, and also my virtual school experience hat on, that the idea of personal over perfect, I think is really what seems to be striking a chord with schools that are doing well on their engagement with parents online. So that's great to hear you're finding the same. It's been great to see you at some in-person student recruitment events very recently, David. I saw you in Paris, maybe last week or the week before, but it does feel very much like student recruitment has become very much a digital process now for many schools. And do you think that's going to play more and more of a part in your future student recruitment?
Definitely. I must say that being back on the road and being able to board a flight and meet families in person was incredible. It was certainly the top 3 days I've had in the last near on 2 years. It's been pretty much 2 years since I was last overseas. But nothing will beat that. Nothing will beat face-to-face meetings with families, with our agents, with our partners. However, what it also comes down to now is, once we're face-to-face with them, how do we actually present ourselves?
Yeah. And
that's what needs to be factored in, that one-stop shop sort of experience. And we invested, and one of them's already been mentioned, the 360 tours. That was one of our big investments during lockdown, and one of the early things that we made sure we had in place. But most recently, we invested in Virtual School Experience, which is an online platform that some of you may already be aware of and using. And that creates that one-stop experience. And that was sort of something that we already had in place, which we were using to promote ourselves to prospective families, sharing personal information, bespoke sort of content relevant for their child or the particular market. And that was something we were using prior to being able to travel. But it was something which came in very useful when I was actually with families in Paris. So we were using that. And it went down exceptionally well. And it is a platform that I would certainly highly recommend schools look into, because it makes that sales marketing, I know sometimes we don't like that term, but it makes it so much easier because you've got everything you need in one place. And then again, if you are working with agents and partners, you can create bespoke experience so they have all the information that they need. You are giving them the messages that you want them to pass on, rather than them searching through your website and extracting that information themselves.
Fantastic. That's great to hear that you're enjoying the platform. I think something that has really just been sped up here is maybe that school admissions technology piece was a bit behind EdTech generally, and I think now more and more schools are understanding that your buyer or your prospective parent is, you know, they're seeing a fee-paying education as a premium product, and now it's very much a digital decision-making process. You know, they're expecting that premium level of service and that exceptional customer journey for their school to be delivered to them online as a parent. So that's interesting to hear the way you've adapted that. And then just thinking about recruitment from a digital perspective, do you think the parents are now going to consider a wider net of schools, maybe a wider sort of geographical location, because they can attend more open days, they've got much more information at their fingertips of a wider range of schools and countries? Or do you think, or are you seeing international student parents doubling down on a local market and preferring an international school in the country where they live rather than sending their kid to a UK boarding school?
Yes, well, I think parents may consider attending more virtual events. Obviously, it's so much easier. It's something that we will continue to do because obviously we can reach those overseas markets. We don't need to worry about inviting them to the school, but obviously the ideal situation is have them on campus. But now it's so much easier being able to do them virtually as well. So having that sort of hybrid model, I would highly recommend moving forward. But I would say with the majority of our domestic sort of families, they kind of already know the sort of school that they're looking for their child, whether it's based on location, accessibility, and so on. But what it does for us is it increases our target audience, our target market, and we will be frightened to market further afield. And that is something that we're already doing, especially when families are now, we're finding, looking to move away from the big cities or certainly have their children away from the big cities and studying in a more rural location.
That's really interesting. I'm conscious we're over time, but I just wanted to take one sort of real positive from you, David, and sort of another forward-looking question. With your sort of that recruitment hat on, what do you think sort of is the next big trend for 2022, say, in the way that you're going to engage with and recruit more parents and engage more families?
So from a recruitment point of view, we will be doing, like I said before, more virtual open events, but ensuring that we do them in different time zones. Forget about them being convenient for you or for the school. It's about being convenient for your actual market. So if they're at 4 o'clock in the morning, who cares? We'll be still running them. But also live stream events. So not just for prospective markets. I think this is a key area where schools can definitely invest in. But there is, I would say, more of a quality control required around certain live stream and music concerts and so on, and a level of investment is needed there. But that opens up your current parent body, also the overseas parent body, so they can actually see their children engaged in what's happening at the school. So they're two of the big ones, but also we'll be continuing to develop bespoke experiences through VSE as we develop and strengthen our sort of online presence as well.